The outburst no one expected. No one had ever dared raise their voice at Richard Hale. Not in boardrooms, not at lavish galas, not even during the private dinners, where deals worth hundreds of millions were decided over vintage wine. Richard, the billionaire founder of Hale Global, had built an empire on precision, intimidation, and unyielding pride. His name alone was enough to silence even the most confident executives. Fear was his currency and arrogance his armor. But that afternoon, everything changed. Emily Carter, a 28-year-old executive assistant, had joined Hale Global just 3 months earlier. She came from a small town in Ohio, where hard work was a way of life and speaking truth was often the only way to survive. Emily had worked through college, juggling 2 jobs, paying her own way, and learning early that fear could not dictate your life. That same courage, she would soon discover, was the only thing that could keep her sane in the tempestuous world of Richard Hale. The penthouse office was tense. Rain tapped the windows of the 42nd floor, mirroring the storm brewing inside. Richard had just returned from a failed international deal in Singapore, and his frustration was palpable. He paced across the room, slamming contracts on the glass desk with enough force to make the entire office tremble. His sharp blue eyes scanned every executive like a predator assessing its prey. Emily had spent the last 18 hours meticulously organizing the critical contracts for the next week. She had double-checked every clause, every signature, every page. She entered the office quietly, carrying the folders, careful not to draw attention. Richard glanced at her, his frown deepening. "This isn't right. Do you even understand what you're doing?" His voice was sharp enough to cut through steel. Every executive in the room stiffened. No one had ever dared contradict him. Ever. Not even for a fraction of a second. Yet Emily felt a strange surge of determination, an instinct that whispered she could not let this moment pass without standing up for herself. "I've worked 18 hours making sure these contracts are flawless," she said, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "If that's not enough for you to treat me with respect, then maybe the problem isn't my work. It's your attitude." The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, suffocating. Senior executives froze, in disbelief. Whispers died in their throats. Even the assistant who had served coffee for decades seemed to hold her breath. Richard's face remained impassive, but a flicker of something, astonishment, maybe even curiosity, crossed his eyes. He had never seen this before. Someone not bending under the weight of his authority. "You're not afraid of me?" he finally said, his voice barely above a growl. "I shouldn't be," Emily replied, her hands gripping the folders so tightly her knuckles whitened. Respect is earned, not demanded. No one knew what to expect. A tirade? A dismissal? Security called in? None came. Richard merely stared at her, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. By the end of the meeting, the executives quietly left, murmuring among themselves. Emily stayed behind, unsure if she had just secured her job or signed her own professional death warrant. Later that evening, a phone call came. It was Eleanor Hale, Richard's mother. At 72, Eleanor had a presence that commanded attention without intimidation. Her voice, warm and measured, carried an edge that only those who truly knew her understood. "I've heard about today," Eleanor said. "Emily, don't be afraid. There are few people who can stand up to my son. You have a courage he rarely respects, and that is rare." Emily's pulse quickened. "Mrs. Hale, Call me Eleanor," she interrupted gently. "You did exactly what you should have. Do not let him intimidate you into thinking otherwise. Someday, Richard may even thank you for it. For now, just know you've caught my attention." Emily hung up, her mind spinning. The calm warmth of Eleanor's voice was in sharp contrast to the storm she had faced in the office. She couldn't have known that this phone call would mark the first step in a series of events that would change her life forever. As she stared out of her small apartment window that night, the city lights of New York twinkling below, Emily felt a strange mix of exhilaration and fear. She had spoken the truth to one of the most powerful men in the world, and lived to tell the tale. But the road ahead, she sensed, would be far more treacherous than she could imagine. Little did she know, Richard Hale's pride had been challenged for the first time in decades, and his mother had already decided that Emily Carter was no ordinary assistant. Eleanor Hale had a vision, and Emily would soon discover that she was at the center of it. The storm outside had passed, but inside the penthouse in her own heart, a storm had only just begun. The following week, Emily approached the Hale Global offices with a mix of apprehension and quiet determination. She expected at any moment to be summoned and fired, or at least be rated in a way that would make her regret her audacity. Yet each day passed without incident. Richard Hale, the man whose name alone had silenced boardrooms, seemed restrained. He did not call her incompetent or fumble over petty insults. Instead, he watched her work with a calculated gaze, as if studying a rare phenomenon. Emily didn't fully understand the shift. She only knew that survival in this world required observation, patience, and the occasional daring move. She buried herself in contracts, schedules, and emails, her hands moving with practiced precision. Still, in the back of her mind, the memory of Richard's piercing stare lingered, and with it, the strange sense that nothing would ever be the same. It was on a gray Tuesday morning that the Rayall test arrived. Richard summoned her to his office. His tone was calm, almost eerily so, devoid of the biting sarcasm she had expected. "Cancel all my meetings for Friday," he said without preamble. "All of them, sir?" Emily asked cautiously, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes. Keep it off the official calendar. I'll be in Connecticut. Personal matter." Connecticut. The thought made her pause. The Hale family home was legendary. Sprawling gardens, historic architecture, and a legacy of wealth that few could comprehend. Few employees ever visited. Fewer still were invited willingly. Emily carried out the task meticulously, but her curiosity gnawed at her. Why was Richard, a man who had built his life around business and control, suddenly prioritizing a visit to his mother? And why had he chosen her, an assistant of just 3 months, to manage the arrangement? By Friday afternoon, Emily found herself driving up the winding lanes of the Connecticut countryside, the Hale estate looming larger with every mile. Rain had turned the drive slick, and the overcast sky cast a muted light over the manicured grounds. She parked, straightened her jacket, and approached the front door, her heart pounding. Eleanor Hale opened the door before she could knock. At 72, Eleanor's presence was commanding but inviting. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and her attire was understated yet elegant. She extended a hand, her eyes twinkling with warmth and something unspoken. "Emily," Eleanor said, guiding her inside. "I've heard a story about you." Emily felt her cheeks flush. I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Hale." "Call me Eleanor," she interrupted smoothly. "And yes, I know exactly what I mean. A young woman who dares to speak the truth to Richard. That's something rare in his world, and even rarer in mine." They spent the afternoon in the sunlit drawing room, overlooking rolling gardens and a koi pond shimmering in the subdued light. They spoke of life, resilience, and the challenges of balancing ambition with integrity. Emily felt a strange sense of comfort in Eleanor's presence, as though the older woman's understanding reached deeper than mere social pleasantries. "I admire courage," Eleanor said, pouring tea with deliberate care. "And I've watched my son grow accustomed to fear and obedience, not honesty. But you've shown him what it means to stand firm." Emily swallowed. She had never expected praise from the matriarch of a family she had only encountered in stories and whispers. "I was just trying to do my job honestly," she said. "Perhaps," Eleanor replied softly, "but sometimes doing your job is more than just completing tasks. Sometimes it's about showing character. You have that, and my son, whether he admits it or not, recognizes it." The conversation turned personal. Eleanor asked about Emily's family, her childhood, and her aspirations. Emily spoke openly, cautiously revealing her struggles and triumphs without fear of judgment. Eleanor listened intently, offering insight, encouragement, and, most surprisingly, a subtle challenge. "You may not realize it now," Eleanor said, standing to retrieve a small notebook from a nearby shelf, "but the path you're on is rare. Few people can maintain integrity in a world like my son's. And even fewer can earn the respect of someone like him." She handed Emily the notebook. "Keep notes of everything you learn. You may need them more than you think." Emily accepted it with a nod, her fingers brushing against Eleanor's. The gesture was brief, yet it carried an unspoken acknowledgement, a connection that went beyond professional courtesy. By the time Emily left the Hale estate, dusk had settled over the grounds. The rain had ceased, leaving the air crisp and fragrant. She returned to New York with a mixture of awe and unease. She had stepped into the personal life of a billionaire's family, and she had emerged not humiliated, but quietly empowered. And somewhere, across the miles, Richard Hale was learning that the woman he had dismissed, underestimated, and perhaps even feared, might be someone he could not ignore. Emily's life was quietly shifting, like tectonic plates beneath the earth. What began as a simple act of courage, speaking up, was now spiraling into something far more complex. And though she had no idea what lay ahead, she sensed that this journey would test every ounce of her resilience, intelligence, and fortitude. In the quiet of her apartment that night, Emily opened Eleanor's notebook. Inside were instructions, observations, and words of advice that seemed both practical and prophetic. She realized, with a mixture of excitement and apprehension, that she was now part of a world that demanded more than skill. It demanded strength, poise, and an unshakable spirit. The storm that had begun in the penthouse office was far from over. Returning to New York after her visit to the Hale estate, Emily felt a subtle shift in the air around her. The office, once a place of intimidation and unspoken rules, now carried an edge of curiosity from Richard Hale himself. He didn't smile, and he didn't praise her openly, but his glances followed her more frequently, as though silently weighing her every move. It was unsettling, yet oddly exhilarating. Emily's daily routine had intensified. Contracts, schedules, boardroom preparations, and emails consumed her hours, yet she found herself observing Richard more than ever. There was a precision in his work, a rhythm in the chaos he created, that only someone who watched closely could understand. She began to anticipate his demands before he voiced them, carefully aligning her actions to match his expectations without sacrificing her own integrity. It was during a late afternoon meeting that the first real test came. Richard called Emily into his office unexpectedly. The storm clouds outside mirrored the tension inside the room. On his desk lay a thick folder of sensitive contracts from a prospective international partnership. He gestured toward it. "Emily, I need these reviewed tonight. Every clause, every signature. Errors will not be tolerated. Can you handle that?" Emily nodded, meeting his piercing gaze. "Yes, sir. I'll have it completed by midnight." Richard leaned back, studying her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "You know the stakes," he said quietly. "This isn't just business. One mistake could cost millions, and mistakes are expensive." She swallowed, carefully considering her words. "I understand. I'll double-check everything personally." The night stretched long and tense. The city lights twinkled below as Emily cross-referenced every page, line, and clause. Hours passed, punctuated by the occasional glance at her phone to check the time. Around midnight, she finalized a folder, ensuring it was flawless. When she delivered it to Richard, he examined the document silently. He turned each page with deliberate slowness, as if testing her resolve. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at her. "Impressive," he said, the single word carrying a weight of unspoken acknowledgement. "Most people would have failed under pressure. You didn't." Emily felt a flicker of relief, but remained cautious. She had learned that in Richard's world, praise was rare and trust was even rarer. Then came an unexpected twist. 2 days later, Eleanor Hale requested Emily's presence at the estate once more. This time, the visit carried an urgency Emily couldn't ignore. Upon arrival, Eleanor greeted her with a knowing smile. "Richard has been difficult," Eleanor began, her voice soft but firm. "He's testing you. But tests are not always about skill. Sometimes they are about loyalty, patience, and judgment. Today, I want to see how you navigate a challenge that involves both his business and personal interests." Emily's heart raced. She was no stranger to pressure, yet Eleanor's words hinted at something far more complex than any office task. Eleanor led her to a sunroom overlooking the sprawling gardens. A man in his mid-30s, impeccably dressed, awaited them. Eleanor introduced him as Jonathan Reed, a senior executive and longtime associate of Richard's. "Jonathan will present you with a scenario," Eleanor said. "How you handle it will show both your capability and your character. Remember, Emily, integrity is more important than cleverness, and courage is more important than compliance. Jonathan explained the situation, a delicate negotiation with an international partner that required Emily to act as liaison between Richard and the other party. Every detail mattered, and a single misstep could ruin years of strategic planning. Emily listened carefully, taking notes and asking precise questions to clarify the nuances. Your task, Jonathan said, is to draft a proposal that satisfies both parties while protecting Hale Global's interests. You have 3 hours. The challenge tested everything she had learned. Emily worked methodically, considering every angle, anticipating Richard's possible objections, and balancing diplomacy with assertiveness. The hours flew by in a blur of calculations, phrasing, and strategy. When she finally presented the proposal, Jonathan examined it with a critical eye, flipping through pages and muttering under his breath. "This is thorough," he said finally. "I can't find a flaw." Eleanor smiled. "Excellent. You've demonstrated not just skill, but judgment. Richard will see that soon enough." Emily left the estate that evening exhausted but exhilarated. She realized she was no longer just an assistant. She was becoming an integral part of a world that demanded resilience, intelligence, and unwavering self-confidence. She also understood something Eleanor had subtly hinted at. Richard's respect was growing, though he would never express it openly. Back in New York, the dynamics in the office began to shift. Colleagues who had once treated her with polite distance now observed her with quiet curiosity. Richard's glances were sharper, more calculating, yet never hostile. Emily knew she had earned a position that few ever did, a balance of trust, challenge, and observation within the sphere of a man known for testing everyone around him. That night, as she reviewed her notes and reflected on Eleanor's guidance, Emily understood that her journey was far from over. Every challenge she had faced was preparing her for something greater, a test not just of skill, but of endurance, courage, and moral fortitude. She closed her laptop, her mind buzzing with strategies, observations, and possibilities. The road ahead would be unpredictable, but for the first time, Emily felt prepared to navigate it. The storm that had begun in the penthouse office was evolving, and she was learning to stand at its center without fear. Emily's mornings had grown tense, measured, and oddly exhilarating. Every glance from Richard Hale seemed to carry a question she couldn't always answer, a test she hadn't realized she was undergoing. Yet, for the first time, she felt a sense of control, however fragile, in a world that had once been entirely dominated by the billionaire's temper and arrogance. It was during one particularly gray Thursday morning that an envelope arrived, hand-delivered by a courteous butler whose presence seemed to signal importance. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and sealed with a Hale family insignia, a crest Emily had only seen in photographs. She opened it carefully, revealing a single handwritten note in Eleanor Hale's elegant script. "Emily, I would like you to join us for dinner this Saturday at the estate. Richard will be present. Your presence is requested as more than a guest. Please arrive at 7. Eleanor." Emily's heart skipped. Dinner at the Hale estate? With Richard? And an insinuation that she was expected as more than a simple assistant? She stared at the note for several long minutes, her mind racing. She understood that this was not merely a social invitation. It was a test of presence, composure, and subtlety. Every step she had taken since standing up to Richard had led to this moment. Saturday arrived with crisp autumn air, sweeping through New York City. Emily chose her outfit with meticulous care, a simple yet elegant dress, understated jewelry, and polished shoes. She wanted to project confidence without arrogance, poise without pretension. As she approached the estate once more, her breath caught at the familiar sight of the sprawling gardens, now painted in shades of amber and gold by the setting sun. Eleanor greeted her warmly at the door, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and calculation. "Emily, come in. Richard is expecting you," she said softly, guiding her through corridors lined with historic portraits and rich tapestries. The dining room was immaculately set, candles casting a soft glow across polished oak and crystal. Richard was already present. Seated at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, as if calculating the exact weight of her presence. He rose briefly as she entered, offering a small nod of acknowledgement that seemed monumental compared to his usual demeanor. Dinner began formally, with conversations alternating between business topics and personal anecdotes. Emily found herself navigating a delicate dance, responding politely, offering insight where appropriate, and listening intently to Eleanor's subtle guidance. She could feel Richard's eyes on her throughout, measuring, weighing, calculating. Then, midway through the meal, Eleanor leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Emily, you have surprised my son. Not many people would dare speak to him as you did, and even fewer would survive the experience. I see qualities in you that I have always hoped he would recognize in someone, perhaps qualities he cannot easily admit to needing in his life." Emily's chest tightened. She understood the implication, yet she kept her composure. I simply tried to act with integrity," she said cautiously. Eleanor smiled knowingly. Integrity is rare, but strength coupled with it is even rarer. And strength, Emily, is something my son will respect, even if he struggles to show it. Richard finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "You've managed challenges with precision, Emily. Most have faltered, yet you navigate pressure with skill." The compliment was sparse, economical, yet it carried a weight heavier than any praise she had received before. The conversation shifted then, subtly, to Richard's personal reflections, his mother's influence, and hints of his own vulnerability. Emily listened without judgment, realizing that this dinner was not just a test of composure or intelligence, but a window into a world most assistants would never see. A billionaire's private life, shaped by power, expectation, and hidden longing for genuine connection. After dessert, Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Emily's. "My dear, I believe you and I understand one another. You are no ordinary assistant, and I hope one day that Richard sees you as someone indispensable, perhaps even as family." Emily's mind reeled. The thought that the matriarch of the Hale family might see her as potential family was overwhelming. She nodded carefully, unsure what to say, but Eleanor's warm smile assured her that silence could suffice. The evening concluded with a quiet sense of accomplishment and unease. Emily left the estate with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had passed an unspoken test, yet she understood that Richard Hale was far from predictable. Every glance, every word, every subtle interaction carried significance. She realized that in this game, every move mattered, and the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. Back in New York, she reflected on the evening, replaying Richard's subtle nod, Eleanor's approving gaze, and the unspoken acknowledgement that she was no longer just an assistant. She had crossed a threshold. She had earned a place in a world that demanded brilliance, poise, and courage. And somewhere in that delicate balance of power, respect, and subtlety, she could sense that her journey with Richard Hale was only beginning. The night air was cool as she returned to her apartment, leaves rustling in quiet symphony outside her window. Emily understood that the path forward would be filled with challenges, both professional and personal. Yet, for the first time, she felt the thrill of possibility, the sense that her voice, her integrity, and her courage could shape a future she had scarcely dared to imagine. And Richard Hale, ever silent and calculating, was watching closer than ever before. The weeks following the dinner at the Hale estate brought a new rhythm to Emily's life. The office no longer felt like a battlefield she had to survive, though Richard Hale's presence was still formidable, but a chessboard, where every move required precision, foresight, and courage. She had grown adept at anticipating his expectations, managing his formidable schedule, and navigating the subtle power dynamics that defined the Hale empire. Then, one late Wednesday afternoon, everything shifted. Emily was reviewing documents in Richard's office when he entered, carrying an air of quiet authority she had never seen paired with vulnerability. He closed the door behind him and approached his desk, placing a single folder in front of her. "Emily," he began, his voice uncharacteristically measured, "I need you to handle something unusual, personal, discreet. You're the only person I trust." Emily felt her pulse quicken. "Of course, sir," she replied, maintaining her composure. Richard leaned against his desk, his eyes not meeting hers directly. "My mother, she has been insisting on something that I initially dismissed, but she's persistent, and she may be right." Emily's brow furrowed. "May I ask what it is?" He paused, then gestured for her to sit. "She wants you. My mother wants you as part of the family, more than a trusted assistant. She believes you would make an extraordinary daughter-in-law." Emily blinked. The words hit like a thunderclap. A billionaire's mother, whose reputation for meticulous judgment was legendary, wanted her, not as a friend, not as a protege, but as family. She swallowed hard, struggling to find words that wouldn't betray shock or disbelief. I'm honored, Mrs. Hale. Eleanor suggested. Emily began cautiously. Richard held up a hand. "I didn't say this to flatter or frighten you. I said it to test your reaction, to see if you understand the implications. My mother, she believes in fortitude, intelligence, and character. She sees it in you. And so do I more than I expected to." Emily's mind raced. This was not simply about family or even business. It was a test of trust, judgment, and composure, an evaluation of her capacity to navigate a world far beyond her own experience. She realized that every step she had taken since her first outburst had led to this delicate precipice. I don't know what to say," she admitted honestly. "I've never imagined." "Don't speak yet," Richard interrupted, his tone sharper but not unkind. "Observe. Think. Consider the consequences. Emily, you've shown resilience. You've shown integrity. And now, you must decide if you're prepared for what comes next." The days that followed were filled with reflection, both at her apartment and during her walks through Central Park. Emily considered everything Eleanor had said, every subtle nod, every careful instruction, and Richard's unexpected acknowledgement. The challenge was no longer professional. It was profoundly personal. When she returned to the office on Friday, the tension was palpable. Richard summoned her once again. He handed her the folder from earlier in the week and spoke with quiet gravity. "Emily, I've observed you. Your judgment, your courage, your loyalty. And I must ask you, will you join us in more ways than one? Will you accept the responsibility, the scrutiny, the expectations, and the place my mother envisions for you?" Emily felt the weight of the question settle on her shoulders. The choice was enormous, not simply an offer of personal recognition, but a test of character, endurance, and moral compass. She considered her past, the years of struggle, the resilience built through adversity, the lessons learned through standing firm in the face of power. She began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I will not take this lightly. I will do my best to honor your trust and my own integrity." Richard nodded slowly. "That is all I ask." Days later, a quiet dinner at the Hale estate solidified the decision. Eleanor's warm smile, Richard's measured acknowledgement, and the subtle understanding in every glance between the three of them created a fragile, yet undeniable, bond. Emily realized that the world she had stepped into was demanding, complex, and unrelenting, but it was also full of possibility. In the weeks that followed, she navigated this new reality with care, skill, and unwavering determination. Her colleagues noticed a new confidence, a subtle authority that radiated from her interactions. Richard's acknowledgement of her presence in both professional and personal spheres altered the dynamic of the office. She was no longer simply an assistant. She was an integral part of the inner circle, earning respect not through deference, but through character and performance. And yet, despite this growing influence, Emily never lost sight of herself. She understood that resilience was not about bending to expectation, but about standing firm amid challenge, uncertainty, and scrutiny. Every decision, every conversation, every interaction became a step on a path she had carved with courage, intelligence, and integrity. The storm that had begun in the penthouse office had evolved into something greater. Emily had not only survived the turbulence of Richard Hale's world, she had begun to thrive within it. The respect she had earned, the trust she had cultivated, and the recognition she had received were not merely rewards. They were affirmation that character, courage, and intelligence could reshape even the most formidable of worlds. As she returned to her apartment late one evening, the city lights glittering below, Emily realized that the journey was far from over. Challenges would continue, tests would arise, and scrutiny would never waver. Yet for the first time, she felt truly prepared. Prepared not just to survive, but to rise, to lead, and to transform the spaces she occupied. And somewhere across the city, Richard Hale watched with quiet calculation, his respect now unmistakable, his admiration tempered by the recognition that Emily Carter was no ordinary assistant. She was someone extraordinary, someone who had dared, endured, and emerged stronger than even he had anticipated. The morning air in New York felt unusually crisp, as though the city itself held its breath in anticipation. Emily arrived at the Hale Global offices with a quiet determination, fully aware that today would mark a turning point. The months of challenges, tests, and subtle power plays had led to this moment. She had learned to navigate the intricate balance of professional precision and personal diplomacy, yet she remained acutely aware of the stakes. Richard Hale summoned her into his office mid-morning. His expression was unreadable, but the faintest flicker of something, pride, perhaps admiration, played across his sharp features. He gestured toward the window overlooking the skyline. "Emily," he began, voice steady but unusually calm, "Eleanor has made her intentions clear. She believes you belong with us, not just as an assistant, but as part of the family. I must admit, at first I resisted. But seeing how you conducted yourself, how you faced challenges, I realized she may have been right all along." Emily's heart thumped, a mixture of disbelief, pride, and nervous anticipation. I don't know what to say, sir." "You don't have to say anything yet," Richard replied. "Actions have already spoken louder than words. Your courage, integrity, and intelligence have not gone unnoticed." He paused, then leaned slightly forward. "I want you to join my mother and me this evening at this state. Not for a test, not for scrutiny, but for something far more personal." The thought sent Emily's pulse racing. She had navigated professional trials, subtle psychological tests, and intense scrutiny, yet this felt different, raw, emotional, and undeniably personal. She spent the day preparing, not just her appearance, but her mindset, reflecting on how far she had come since the day she had spoken back to Richard Hale in his penthouse office. That evening, she arrived at the Hale estate once more. The golden light of sunset bathed the gardens in warmth, softening the edges of the imposing mansion. Eleanor greeted her at the door with a serene smile, her eyes reflecting pride and quiet satisfaction. Inside, the dining room was intimate, candles casting gentle light over polished wood and crystal. Richard stood at the head of the table, waiting. When Emily entered, he nodded, a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of months of acknowledgement, tension, and unspoken understanding. Dinner began with understated conversation. Emily spoke with ease, her words measured and sincere, reflecting the confidence she had earned over the months. Richard and Eleanor shared stories, laughter, and subtle glances that hinted at the depth of their bond. Finally, Eleanor set down her glass of wine, turning her gaze to Emily with a warmth that took her breath away. "Emily," she said softly, "from the moment you stood up to my son, I knew you were extraordinary, not only because of your courage, but because of your character. You have demonstrated the strength, patience, and intelligence that a family like ours values above all else." Emily felt a lump in her throat. I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Eleanor's smile deepened. "You don't need to thank me. You've already proven yourself. Tonight, I simply want to welcome you. Not as an employee, not as a guest, but as family." Richard finally spoke, his voice low, measured, yet carrying a resonance Emily had never heard before. "Emily Carter, I respect you. I admire your courage, your intelligence, and your integrity. My mother is right. You belong not only here in this office, but in our family. And I want you to know that this is sincere, not obligation. You've earned this, and I trust you completely." The room felt charged, not with tension, but with the quiet gravity of acknowledgement, trust, and acceptance. Emily realized that the storm she had weathered, the scrutiny, the subtle power plays, the test of skill and character, had led her to this exact moment. I'm honored," Emily said softly, feeling a surge of emotion she could not fully contain. "I will do my best to honor your trust and the opportunity you've given me." Eleanor reached across the table, her hand brushing Emily's in a gentle, affirming gesture. "That is all we could ever ask," she said. For the first time, Emily felt a profound sense of belonging. She had entered the world of billionaires as an assistant, a young woman with nothing but skill, integrity, and courage. Yet through her resilience, intelligence, and unwavering character, she had transformed her role, earning not only professional respect, but place within the most personal sphere of the Hale family. The night continued with quiet conversation, laughter, and subtle, unspoken acknowledgement. Emily recognized the depth of Eleanor's wisdom, Richard's respect, and the fragile yet undeniable bonds that had formed through months of trials and tests. She understood that she had earned something far more valuable than titles or recognition. It was trust, acceptance, and the rare privilege of being seen for who she truly was. As she left the estate that evening, the cool night air brushing against her face, Emily reflected on her journey. The storm had begun in a penthouse office. With a single act of courage, it had evolved into tests, challenges, and moments of uncertainty, each one shaping her into someone capable of navigating power, pride, and expectation. And now, she had arrived at a place of emotional and personal fulfillment she had never imagined possible. Emily Carter had dared, endured, and triumphed, not by bending to expectation, but by standing firm in her integrity, intelligence, and courage. And in doing so, she had discovered not only professional success, but a family she never expected, and a place where she truly belonged. The lights of the city glimmered below as she walked through the quiet streets, her heart light with pride, hope, and the knowledge that she had not just survived, but transformed her world. And somewhere across the city, Richard Hale watched silently, acknowledging with a rare smile that the assistant who had dared to speak back had now become an indispensable part of his life and his family. The storm had passed. A new chapter had begun.